Orville Wright Crowder. He was named after the famous early pioneer, his cousin. So, but as I knew him, he was an organizational genius. He founded the Mountain Club of Maryland, the C&O Canal Level Walkers, and organized the first ever overseas nature tours in 1963. From that, he established Crowder Nature Tours, the first overseas company that sent groups overseas. And they went to all parts of the world. I led my first tour for him in 1967. As a result of these tours and the people he met in Europe and elsewhere, in 1969, he and I founded the World Nature Club with 10 other people as a board of directors. I was elected president and Orville was secretary. The purpose of this organization was to promote conservation around the world. We did this by organizing tours with Crowder Nature Tours and holding an annual meeting once a year in America and the following year in some overseas country. Orville died from a stroke in 1974. We changed the name to World Nature Association and established the Crowder Memorial Fund. This was to give small conservation and education grants to projects in developing countries using Orville's assets, which I had inherited. My wife Sherry and I formed World Nature Tours to carry on the travel part. We organized worldwide tours for about 20 years. The association's committee, under the leadership of Daphne Gemmell, continued giving these grants until 1998, when the World Nature Association voted to merge with ANS, and I decided to transfer the funds to the Audubon Naturalist Society to carry on the work. At Sherry's suggestion, the fund was renamed Crowder-Messersmith Conservation Fund, which continues to give grants as an ANS outreach project. Now I'd like to introduce Daphne Gemmell.
Thank you, Don. Welcome, everyone. My role is to introduce our speaker and his topic. I have known Mark for many years. I've been doing a bird survey on this island, Vieques, Puerto Rico, since 1983, and I'm about ready to go down there in 2 weeks. Mark is the Director of Community Relations and Field Research at the Vieques Conservation Historical Trust, which is a nonprofit environmental organization on the island. Maybe some of you even have heard of Vieques because it had sort of a notoriety for many years as a bombing range for the US Navy. In around 2001, the Navy pulled out and a large part of the island was turned over to the US Wildlife Refuge Program and has remained as a Vieques National Wildlife Refuge since then. Mark is a leader not only in Vieques, but in the Caribbean in terms of scientific research and citizen science and education. He gives papers at various conferences and represents the island in many forums. He leads an award-winning MANTA environmental education program for children on the island to make them aware and value the marine areas that are surround them. He has been involved in mangrove restoration projects, studying the bioluminescent bay, which is, I think, 1 of 5 left in the world. All the others have been destroyed by pollution. And for a lot of his work, the US Environmental Protection Agency in 2017 declared him one of their environmental champions. What he's going to talk about tonight is the smallest aquarium in the world. It was a marvelous teaching opportunity for students on the island as well as tourists. But in 2017, Hurricane Maria, as I know you all are aware, just went over as a category 5 over the island, just uprooting and destroying so much. And there's still vestiges of that, and they're still recovering. And you can see from this slide sort of what happened to the smallest aquarium in the world because of the hurricane. And Mark will talk about that and how it's been restored. And the tie to the Crowder-Messersmith Fund is that we had a very generous anonymous donor who set up a special fund to allow us to give grants for environmental education, recovery related to natural disasters. Mark, the Vieques Conservation Trust applied for one of those grants, and we awarded it for the restoration of the smallest aquarium in the world. And at that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark to tell us more about it. Mark, it's all yours.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you very, very much. I'm honored that this is something that I was chosen for. I have a lot of respect for Daphne Gemel, and a lot of respect and thanks to the organization, to the fund for helping us. I'm going to make sure that I have my presentation here up and that you all can see it. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So yes, this is a story that has to do with rebuilding the smallest aquarium in the world, which is a name that we got from the aquarium world as we started, because we had this tiny aquarium that you would see, that you're going to see in some of the slides, and they couldn't believe the things that we could do out of it, or how strangely we ran differently than most educational aquariums. So I stood at a point next to the president of the Monterey Bay Aquarium and some of the other aquariums in some conference, and they were like, oh, this is the guy who has the smallest aquarium in the world. And it stuck. And so it was a great name for him. As Daphne said, I am the Director of Community Relations and Field Research for the Vieques Conservation Historical Trust. Proud to be on it. There's our logo. You'll see our famous condor that represents one of our cultural and archaeological sites here, a whole new culture in the Caribbean nobody knew about until Vieques. And let me place you a little bit here. You're looking at Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. You might miss Vieques because, as you see in this type of contrast, it's not even visible, but it's where that waypoint is marking. As Daphne well said, it used to be a military base. So if you look at the lower map, that's Vieques. And at one point, it was split up that way, a civilian area in the middle. And then we had Navy range on one side and Navy more storage and some other type of uses that they gave to the west side of the island. You'll notice it has a little stick coming out of the northwest. That is a pier, a big pier, a mile-long pier that is sticking out there. And in the south, we have our famous bays and some of the best beaches in the world. Vieques in itself is not ugly, as you could see. We're famous for the black sand beach. We're famous for our ceiba tree, some of the cultural sites. We have a geological variety that's very interesting. Now you can see in the top left there, the Puerto Rico and then Vieques, just slightly 6-7 miles to the southwest there. It's an island about 21 miles. It is about 4.5 miles wide, only from 8,000 to 10,000 people in a fluctuating type of population. Underserved is a good way to describe it. And it has a complex history, not only the Navy part that we were talking about, but you got to look at its development from those travel from the cultures that came from South America and established here, different culture like the ones I mentioned from our logo, which were found here, and it's named after a place in Vieques called La Hueca, the Huecoide culture. That kind of proved that there were more travels than we thought from South America up to this island chain. And this island had a lot of mixtures since then. Obviously, the indigenous cultures that mixed here are facing the Spanish invasion. That mixes also not only with the Spanish, we had French, Danish, British, many other cultures that mixed. So it was a very big change for Vieques in those times. And we won't go into a history lesson because I'm not a historian and because it's a wide, long topic. But obviously after that, this becomes a sugar cane. So all the ecology of the island and the socioeconomic system changed. Then it becomes a military base. Then there's a very famous movement to create a civil disobedience to get the base to stop the bombing and to leave the area. And it became a Fish and Wildlife Service. I do go through the historical framework because conservation in our island is most necessary now as the island suddenly breathes and says, let's grow, let's develop, let's get tourism. And now we're faced with a real need to cash in those chips from the education that we give to the youth, to connect to those scientists so that we can get some sustainable development going in an environment, and I mean socio-political environment, that is not necessarily pro-conservation in general. And that's what we're looking at. And Vieques does present a plethora of research and models that could be said due to the ecosystems we have, the isolation we have as an island, and a great opportunity to test many island-related technologies, educational programs, research, etc. We are very small, but we do big things. But when I say that, is because we are a very tiny organization. If you ever come, and we hope you do, you'll see we have 2 little sites, but out of them, there's a lot of things going on that have to do with some of the topics that I'll talk about. But over 35 years, the founders of this organization set out to create conservation programs, and our most prime focus point, the thing we work most towards, is the conservation of the bioluminescent bay, as Daphne said, the brightest in the world. This is by far the best example of what they call a pristine bioluminescent bay in the world. And we do many different programs to try to conserve it. There you see it on the top right. It's not a bioluminescent bay talk, but basically you see the plankton there, Pyrodinium bahamense. You also see a bay. This bay has a great set of features that creates the perfect recipe to trap in a paradise this plankton, single cell plankton, that whenever you touch it, it will glow. And you can see it behind one of our students here. It's a source of pride for the island. This is the thing they can go, we have the best in the world. There's a lot of studies, documentaries, science that have been done throughout the years. It is the base of ecotourism in Vieques, and it of course is the prime focus of the Trust scientific research efforts. Show you a video of it. That's the Order of the Orca, our research vessel, electric, and that's somebody putting their hands through the water. The concentration of upwards of sometimes 800,000 at the record level per liter of water of this single cell plankton creates quite a display. You see some of the field research that we're doing there, and how just putting your hands in the water will create an eerie light. Nobody's really been able to capture it. We have new cameras, iPhones can get it, and all these things can capture the blue, but to be there, to feel it, to understand it is something that we really haven't seen anybody do on camera, and they certainly tried. We have taken that into our educational programs as a way to connect the students and connect the people who visited to nature. And how do we help this place? Well, scientific research is simply one of the best ways you can try to understand such a complex ecosystem that has so many variables that are involved that you would need to study for many years, and that we have done. In the top right of the screen there, you could see Dr. Barbara Bernash Baker and Dr. Juan Gonzalez Lagoa. They're the pillars of bioluminescent research in this bay, along with Johns Hopkins professor Howard Seliger and Autumn. And they, from the 1960s and 70s, were looking at this base and saying, these are really incredible models and we have to study it. So we have continued their tradition in doing some of that research in the bay. We work a lot on different type of research monitoring. And a lot of what we do is not really do a lot of the high sciences. It's connect to the science, do the field research, train, build capacity within our lab, the Elizabeth C. Langhorne lab, and to do studies like what you see here, nutrients, the plankton populations. This is our biologist, Iram Sul Cabral. We're faced with obviously water quality needs. We're faced with other conservation monitoring research that may not be as common in other places, like light pollution, invasive species, and many of these coral health and ecosystem health problems that are being brought on by climate change. And we certainly see it firsthand more than many other places that don't see the changes as abrupt as we do. Obviously, the sort of our talk here has to do with the frequency of hurricanes that has been augmented by that climate change. And you can see a really weird thing there. It's a road of stars. One of the things that we have done is team up with agencies like the USGS, the EPA, local government conservation agencies to try to do nature-based models, green infrastructure. In this case, this is a road to stop sediment into our bioluminescent bay, and we had to put lights, so we made a glow. Our staff actually is based in Vieques, but our executive director, Lidio Marquez, is part of White House Sustainability Task Force when it was active, GLISPA planning groups for public policy, the Island Storm Climate Change Initiative that is going on in all the US islands. And so there's people connected to the trust or that work in the trust that are working on public policy for conservation all the way to the international level, which is outstanding. And one of the things we represent is that island view, that small rural community view that is so important to connect the community to science. That's one of our mantras, is how to get community-based science, not only having the community have the science put on them, but to build the capacity and to get the science they need for conservation. Education is one of our biggest things. Manta and the Wizards of Nature, we basically went through a whole different non-traditional education thing. It was like, classrooms don't really work anymore for what we want to teach. So we do have the luxury, have one of the most beautiful classrooms in the world, which are our beaches, our mangrove forests, our seagrass beds, and all these things. So we take in at different levels from the youth to our friends who have been in the world a little longer, and connected them. Usually they have something to gain from each other, but also the information is just translated differently. And one of the things we do is that we're going to study the bay, we go to the bay. We're going to study the reef, we go to the reef. And we're going to include them in the reforestation, in the citizen science, in actual actions rather than just theory, which they obviously does well. Manta is involved in our marine life exhibit and in our aquarium because we found that that was the most capturing tool. Obviously, the ocean is the best, but we were bringing in creatures. We were using scientific research methods in the aquarium. We were working with different exhibits that they had to build in the aquarium. And Manta, which is the movement for environmental protection or environmental, natural, and environmental treasures, is definitely a great philosophy that worked through the marine life exhibit. They were really the ones that ran it for a very long time.
Hey, Mark.
And yes.
We have a question from Lynette Lander.
I'm ready.
She says, I know that nearby Fajardo has been ecologically damaged by too much tourist love, particularly drowned by BioBay there. What measures are in place to protect Vieques from a similar fate?
Well, in theory, to be honest with you, because I can't be nothing but honest about this, the trust has always pushed to get the right policy, to get the right conservation. We focused on science and science-based solutions. The environment in Puerto Rico, for the longest time, some of the agencies that had the jurisdiction and the mandate to protect these areas did not have the proper resources or the political will behind them to actually conserve this place. So although I would love to tell you that the measures are there, legally they are. The management plans are there. We, as the Vieques Conservation Historical Trust, have a co-management agreement, but we don't necessarily do the policing or the jurisdictional law enforcement and things like that. Just now, recently, they have announced an agreement with the municipalities of some of these natural areas to try to protect it. And what we have seen is that we need to go back to understanding that the science and the researchers, not only me, but the people who are renowned in this field, need to be involved. So the answer to your question is like, there's been a lot of education, there's been a lot of science, there's been a lot of capacity building, training, job creation that we have done, a lot of work done on this tiny little lab here. But I fear that we all need to make a stand in protecting bioluminescent bays and high ecological value area before the current wave of development and to have this economic development as we recover takes over them. These are highly delicate areas. So it's a turmoil time for it. It's part of the answer to that question. So we're gonna need everybody who loves bioluminescent bays, like the person who asked the question, to keep a watchful eye.
Thank you. We have one additional question from Karen. Do the youth in your education programs live on Vieques, or are they brought over by boat?
Well, no, Manta educational program has 3 tiers. One is 5 to 8-year-olds, 9 to 12-year-olds, 13 to 18-year-olds. And then we have the ex-Manta, like people who have been out of that. All of our educational programs are based and geared to our local kids. However, we found that visiting people or people who had families said like, we want to be in Manta. And we were like, we can't do it. But wait, we created a program called Mantastic, where we would take visiting students and integrate them to add a level of cultural integration to both parties. And we thought there was a good equitative exchange between them as they are peers, as they are bringing a perspective of a different reality. Some of them over there have accessibility to a lot of more modern things, but these kids here can ride horses bareback and can dive 100 feet. You know, like there's a lot of great things that they learn from each other. And that's been a very successful program too. So yes, there are students that come from Puerto Rico, Africa, Britain, the States, and other places, but that's a small program we have. Most of our programs are for local students.
Thank you so much. That's all for now.
So our marine life exhibit, you're seeing its beginnings there. And this started because somebody in Culebra, our neighboring island, had some tanks say like, we can't run this, this is too hard, it's just not gonna work. And we tried, we're doing other things, you could have it. So our resident scientist, Dr. Barbara Bernard Baker, went with some local fishers and they went to get the gear on a boat and brought it over to the island. Colleen McNamara, who's our current president, just stopped by my house. It's like, I need you to build a marine life exhibit. It's like, okay. And for free. It's like, okay. And the Smithsonian was kind enough also to lend us a person who's a very special man called Jose Mendez, that fish guy, they called him. He built it with me and other people on the trust. Sadly, he passed away. And that's not only a good friend, but also a good example of how we in these small community places can learn from people who have such expertise and transfer that to the youth. We become really good at that transfer of the intellectual capacity to the local youth. Many times in the high sciences, that did not transfer. And so it's very important for both parties. We did eventually get a grant from NOAA. We built a marine life exhibit book. We built a bioluminescent bay room that you'll see. And we started building up. One of the things that it did was like, hey, there's a little dilemma here. Tanks, we're gonna build tanks, we're conservation people. We're gonna have an educational aquarium, we're gonna have a exhibit aquarium. What kind of aquarium we have? So I couldn't get it through my head. I was like, you know, eventually I worked with different agencies like Greenpeace at one point. The idea of keeping things in tanks, obviously you've seen our tanks. I wasn't gonna put a killer whale in it. But the idea of keeping things captive is not naturally becoming of conservation organization. So I was like, hey, we could do it. We could certainly do it in a different way. And so we all got together and said, well, we'll do certain things. First, we won't keep the organisms long. We certainly won't keep anything that's, you know, as a species, as you study it, that it's not gonna be comfortable, it's gonna be too nervous, it's gonna be anxious, it's gonna be stressed. So part of what these students did was like, let's go get this organism. And maybe we'll get it and maybe we won't. But we're not going to use bad aquarium practice of finding things or netting things to put them in the tank so people can look at it. We're going to get the organisms we can. We're going to get the organisms that are convenient for the organisms as well. And we're going to participate with the community in the release and capture of these organisms. We'll keep only a small numbers, and you'll see this in some of the videos and the pictures. It doesn't look full like many aquariums, because the reality is that many aquariums don't tell you, even the great ones, that if you fill a tank with a lot of things, many times they die. Even if you have perfect systems, they're not built to live that way, or at least not all of them are built to live that way. We made sure that we had a teaching element to it that was equal value, being obviously this is not a real metric, but that what we had there was serving a purpose. And for that, we had to put programs like the educational programs combined to a marine life exhibit. We brought the elderly, we brought the elderly centers, we brought the agencies, we brought the guides, the tour guides, we brought people, obviously you see the youth, and we included them as much as we can. Then we also had an element of recovery and support when agencies like the Department of Natural Resources of Puerto Rico, Fish and Wildlife Service says, you got a tank, it's perfect water. We did spend our money on the great filters, air conditioning, and so on. So sometimes we got creatures that we kept in recovery and while the agency had a way to deal with them. We'll go back into that a little bit. We created this room because our main focus is the bioluminescent bay, and we are crazy, right? So we created this room where it was full of lasers and chemical reactions that created fluorescence, phosphorescence. We got this artist, Robert Marino, to take phosphorescent paint and UV lights and create this Illuminarte setup where you could see the organisms, the kids could see it, we could turn lights on and off, we got live scorpions glowing, some really cool stuff, and backlit posters and projections. And for students here who don't really have that exposure to a lot of those fancy displays, it was really good. And that we did with Noah, and we dedicated it to our friend Barbara Bernard Baker. But this room also had live dinoflagellates. So as you look at the marine life exhibit, yes, there's the little tanks, but it's connected to the bio bay room. It's connected to the programs. It's connected to a school's education. And here you see it sort of a mid-level, like we already built it up a little bit. The tanks are not fancy tanks, but they were there. It ran well. We had wood kept breaking, but there, take a look at that image of the mangrove that's in the tank. This is our claim to fame. We were able to grow a mangrove from propagule. This is a red mangrove, Rhizophora manglet, that grew in a tank, and that's not normal. Most aquariums have problems with it. We have the luxury of being outdoors. We have the luxury that right across the street, we have superb salt water. So we did enough water changes. And again, we spent the money more on the filters and the air conditioning to keep them happy and not stressed. And then you see here a little bit of what the question was asking. You're looking at local kids. You're looking at the Mantastic on the bottom. You see the blonde kids and some of the other students mixing together, learning together, some Boy Scouts, etc. But this is how the tanks looked. We decided that we could push it up a little bit. We didn't want to take things out of the water, like the sea stars. You see Bobby Kennedy holding an urchin there. It's not his fault. He didn't know any better. But we exposed people to these creatures. And there are a lot of people here that obviously eat a lot of seafood. And we were able to, by showing them and putting their hands saying, hey, I understand you eat octopus, I don't, but you can't eat the small one because it can't reproduce and so on and so on. But by being in touch with them without hurting them, they had a real connection moment. And that connection moment that we feel in nature that's attached to that blue mind philosophy, or that being around nature is going to convince you, we were able to replicate it a small bit here. And connecting the students, like you see the students from the main island, a local one on the bottom there, also helped because they had something in common. All these people came in common and became equal. We created the viewing tanks that you see there. And we also had our students do community service hours and green hours in our tanks there. These are some of the creatures that you would see. And as you can see that the tanks are not completely full, they're just to keep them alive. And then we were able to build exhibits and connect that to the school's curriculums or to our own curriculum in Manta in terms of what we were teaching or what they were teaching and how they could make part of their school trips be here. In terms of birds, we learned a lot from obviously Daphne Gamel. I don't say that because she's here. Everybody in Vieques will tell you she's left behind a capacity of birding that has made some experts, not me. I'm just too busy and running around. But you have Eric Bermudez, you have Mike Barandaran, you have Andy Hernandez, you have a lot of people here who are serious birders now that were not before she came here. And she's been doing so many things through the years. We, with the birds, at one point, we were able to, feed some of them that were brought to us all beat up and recover some. We had the pleasure of releasing that osprey right in front of our place, but we talked about it, and the reality is we didn't have the capacity or the place to do it, so we stopped participating in that. We talked to Fish and Wildlife and DNR, discussed what we would have to do, and we couldn't. But for a while, we did save some birds, and we did have that experience. We include the bird part in our education, and obviously you see Daphne's book there that we feature in our educational programs, and it certainly put Vieques in another level of birding for our island. I think that what it's done too is give value to some of these areas that is incredible, because now when we have to defend the areas, when we have to go to the salt flats, the wetlands, the keys and all that, there is data. And there is data that the students know and that everybody knows, hey, there's a Birds of Vieques Island book with this location there. So thank you for that as well, Daphne. And we kept turtles. We didn't keep this turtle, but I figure it's the best turtle we got. So we showed it. We did film this turtle nesting. It's a leatherback. It's an ancient super beast. But Fish and Wildlife at some point led us or asked us to put some turtles while they recovered and while they were going through some injuries in our tanks. And so we were able to do that. As well, we had the fishers, if you see the shark there, bringing us sharks that they inadvertently caught. Nurse sharks are illegal to kill in Puerto Rico, that they inadvertently caught in their nets. We established a relationship with seahorses and nurse sharks. They were like, hey, Mark, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to fine. I don't want anything, but I'll bring it to you. You make it live. It's like, it doesn't work that way. I can't really revive things like that, but I can certainly give them a comfortable area and maybe it'll live. And so that worked out. And also, again, connected a sector of the community that usually would be maybe just throwing the shark away or maybe just throwing the seahorse or taking it home or doing something like that. Gave them an option, and we were able to work with that on the agency. So it was a great connection, and it was great to that the smallest aquarium in the world had sharks and turtles. I fed the sharks, and they were like very small, as you can imagine, but one bit me, so now I can say I was attacked by a shark. And then also we work with things. One of our lead programs that we had when we had the plague that became the lionfish, and you can see it there. You can see the students looking at it. We ran invasive species presentation. We also did educational program based on them and took samurai swords and cut them open in the high school, the lionfish, and ate them so the kids saw that it was possible. We talked to the restaurants to serve them. The sushi restaurant started serving and created a little market for it. But I can't tell you that we have one. If you want, later on, you can look at our website, and we have lionfish hunters of Vieques videos of how many we caught and how we go about it and what their status is in the Caribbean, where they're an invasive species. I'm going to stop for a second here, just to make sure nobody has any questions about that part of it before I move on. We're good?
So good.
Okay, so as far as lionfish, they're a more prevalent problem of this day, but the real problem we had was this monster. And that is Hurricane Maria, the strongest since Hugo. We had George, but since Hugo, we had not seen something such devastation. If you look at the top left of the image that's rolling, that's Puerto Rico. It's about to go right over St. Croix and then Vieques. And this is a federal government video, so you know it's accurate, but you can imagine the power of 150 miles per hour plus at times going through an island like this that doesn't really have a lot of protection. The people are not really ready. Our connection to power and water is under the sea. And so we had a complete infrastructure breakdown. We felt completely isolated. In reality, we were left abandoned for weeks. And we had kind of pulled together in Vieques, but there was some severe social, environmental, economic, and structural impact to the island that we have not recovered from, to be honest with you. And I mean that emotionally, socially, and ecologically as well. We were talking with Don and Daphne about that earlier, but that was Maria, and it was certainly powerful. That's what it did to the aquarium. This is after we cleaned enough to be able to go inside, to be able to take pictures. So this is not exactly what happened because we couldn't get in. On your left, or at least my left, there's the aquarium before Maria, then Maria. Then you can see the mangrove beat up, but those trees that are trees that came from another property, and it just came. We didn't really have the time or the ability to do much with it. We of course had released the creatures except the mangrove, and we were in a very scary time because people in Vieques are getting used to the luck of Puerto Rico missing those hurricanes, and this absolutely destroyed the aquarium, destroyed our center. We had dozens of thousands of dollars in damage all around the place, and we have 8 months without power. So that gives you a little idea. You saw that picture before. That's where the tanks used to be. Miraculously, the tree landed and did not take out the entire mangroves. We'll get back to that in a second. And there it lies. There is, at this point, like a 12, 14-year-old mangrove, red mangroves with its aerial roots, chopped up in places. You see the roof falling on it, but it survived. And this is where I like to make a pause for myself. I want to thank you, not because you gave us the funds that we certainly needed, along with the Highland and Flemmer families who helped out as well, and a little help from the friends that we had. It was a moment where our staff was seriously traumatized, like the PTSD of working. Everybody here also was working with the community, trying to help out in some way or other. The people who were vulnerable or didn't have it, we were lost in terms of where our help was going to be. So as we tried to put some sense into it, even after the immediate damage, your help and your funds not only gave us the ability to put it together, and that was fantastic because that gave people something to see. It gave a little normalcy to the situation, but the support made us think, wow, people care about us and people want this. And what it did was give us hope. And that is something that I certainly written for funds. My boss is the actual one that writes the grants, and we certainly got it. But at that moment, it was a healing, and it was a healing not only for our exhibit, it was a healing for the staff and the people. So there's a different type of thank you that I hope is being transmitted here. And then we started. And we started rebuilding it. We said, hey, this is the opportunity to do it right. Let's get rid of the wood. Let's make the tanks nicer. Let's make sure that they're taller. Maybe we can get more. Maybe we can make it more resilient. Build it in a way that we can unhook it completely and take it away in the next hurricane. We combined those efforts with the efforts of other grants and funding that we have. And now it's partly solar. And now it has water catchment that filter and can be used to use in the aquarium. So it's a partly solar water catchment aquarium as well, with some resiliency built into it. We have people that helped us, we have experts, we created new systems that are being used other places so we can release and go. But then we had a problem. You remember that mangrove? Well, these two guys, they told me, what are you going to do with the mangrove? I was like, we could carry it. And that was their reaction that you see there. Absolutely not. This is a survivor. This is a tree that was trimmed like a bonsai. that had hawks and egrets and anemones and butterflies and many other things on the same tree, and had many, many, many big resilience. You see it here. We called it the bonsai warrior, and hope to be able to do it. The hope came from this guy who said, you're not going to carry anything. I'm going to get a bobcat. And then we got the mangrove, and look closely at that tank. This mangrove was actually throwing those prop roots into the bottom of the tank. But when Maria happened and it had no power, it branched down micro roots all over the place and created a bank of nutrient absorbing, moisture holding, basically a filter for itself that was able to capture more nutrients and more substance. That brown thing that you see around did not exist before Maria. It built it as an example of a very resilient and adapting tree right there. And so we moved it. Eventually, everybody got a little bit part of it. And there you go. We finally put it together. It looks beautiful, an illuminated roof. It has many other things around it there. I'm gonna give you a little video of how it turned out when we first opened it there. There's me, it was my birthday, so excuse the weird clothing. But this is an idea of what we did when we finally got it open, when we finally could invite people. We made this little video and said, hey, you know, come see these little things we got and come see an aquarium again. It was very touching for us to be able to do it. The mangroves, you can see it thriving there. And it was definitely something amazing that we had. I will let you see how the tanks look. And that's, again, what we said a little bit, see some of the fish. I'll speed up a little bit because I know we're running out of time, but take a look behind me. There are some plants there. We'll get back to that. Because part of our new movement after Maria, we were reforesting the bay. So the marine life exhibit actually became the first prototype for a mangrove nursery that was later built, you'll see. And the aquarium was where we first tried out a different salinity measures for growing different stages of mostly Rhizophora mangler, red mangrove, but some of the other species as well. And then we were able to apply that to the education. So the aquarium became a nursery. And the nursery became a project, a mangrove project, a nature-based solution, and another rebuilding of a much bigger aquarium, which is the bioluminescent bay, innovative, built, designed locally by University of Puerto Rico professors, Eric Bermudez, and other people that are working on the island, and a great example of how community resilience and an organization could adapt to a new world, to a new changes that we're having. But first try was in the marine life exhibit. Then it grew. Then it said, we could do a lot with it. It's an example of carbon sink, coastal protection, adaptation to climate change. And we needed to do it in the entrance of the bay first, because it was the critical part of the hydrology that created the residence time in the bay. And that's where we're planting now. And we're building it with the community. These are the nurseries that were built later on. Some of these plants started in the marine life exhibit. And this is the field work. You can see Eric Bermudez walking through the depth of the mangroves there, but you can see Neisha and Carlos and other people planting some hope. From it came more science. We were working with the Ocean Foundation, with other groups, and we were able to create more science. And we found an invasive species, for example, Halophila stipulacea was taking over some of the Thalassia testidinium places in the bay. But this project that started small actually led to a project that will probably be reforesting seagrass in the area as well. We have that side of the marine life exhibit, but we also have the Barbosa Center for the Environment and Resiliency. This is a place to have island appropriate technology, science, education, and resilience for the community, but also to build capacity. This is where the mangrove nursery is, but this is a dream of a lot of people at the Trust to create a place that could be a hub where we can transfer that energy, that intellectual capital back and forth, where we can come up with answers and we can all adjust to climate change and to a changing world that in our island is definitely going to be impactful. So we have to start thinking differently, and that has to be based on action in places, in creations of things and ideas like that. That you see in the Barbosa Center. It cannot just be stats and facts and words, because if not, we would have won already. The fact is that in this climate change world, we're in a very pivotal time as well. The Barbosa Center is being set up with 2 solar systems, water catchment, radio, from ham radio to community radio, vocational school courses, certifications, all sorts of things. And certainly it's an example of how when we rebuild more than just the aquarium. We rebuild the organization into something that included the conservation, not only of the natural resources of the island, but also the people, and preparing them for a changing world. I want to thank all of you for participating, for signing on, for being here, but definitely Crowder, Mr. Smith, you know, you definitely did something at the right time. And I know that Daphne was certainly a big part of it. I'm glad that she's coming back. I think what we are, and you're looking at me, and I'm the guy in the picture, and I'm the guy talking and throwing my hands around. This is really what's done by other people, the staff, our executive director, our presidents, all in a union that is a micro example, like many other models that we talked about, of what we all have to do at a larger level. We can't run around in the same circles in adaptation and in recovery and in restoration. We have to look at the world completely differently. And for that, we should rely on each other. So we, again, thank you for being here, for supporting us. We hope that you continue spending time with us, developing these collaborations. And we hope that you come down when it's appropriate to see the smallest aquarium in the world and the brightest bioluminescent bay on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been a great presentation, and I certainly feel inspired by all the work that you're doing in Vieques. We have a couple of questions from the audience already in the chat. From Karen, she was asking about your efforts to rebuild the aquarium in a way that might withstand another major hurricane.
Sure. When you build an aquarium, we have like an outdoor aquarium, you're working on filtering, temperature, catching the leaves. You're working on a lot of things. You're not really thinking of the hurricane itself. So many times we put our plumbing underneath the cement or tiles. In the case wood, we have wood. We have different systems that were not really able to be uprooted or disconnected or that kind of thing. We also had no way to have backup energy or backup water, fresh water, the right type of water with no chlorine, etc. When it happened. As we rebuilt it, we built a lot of, and this is good for houses as well, a lot of check valves, a lot of disconnection. We built it in a way that if we had to take it apart, we could. We did that with actually the mangrove nursery as well. And we just made it adjusted to having a dismantling system we could put indoors while the hurricane passed, and hatches and stuff. We had a good friend build the wood that you saw, Jorge Fernandez Porto built that, and we were able to build ones that you could take off and certainly save it, because all that was destroyed simply because it wasn't built for a hurricane.
Thank you. From Lynette, how are the wild mangroves doing now? Are they recovering?
Not enough, and that's a great question. We're talking about mangroves, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Naturally, many places that receive a hurricane damage is part of the equation, right? And so you would expect that the mangrove forest, not caring, it doesn't care that it's a bioluminescent bay it's contributing to or not, would just simply grow back as well as it could. The problem that the scientists and the people, especially Elvira Cuevas and Héctor Medina from the University of Puerto Rico, we're working with our scientist, Eric Bermudez, who's a botanist biologist. They were like, yes, but we all got together, met with the executive director, and we all agreed. Climate change is changing the rules in terms of how fast it can really recover. So we definitely can step in and help it and kind of balance out a little bit of that because of the social, economical, pride, fisheries, so many efforts that it feeds that we thought it would be a good idea. The mangroves themselves are not growing well in that area that we are replanting. So we chose well now that, you know, we're looking at it. If it wasn't for the ones we're planting, that area would have eroded away and the entrance would be much wider. The residence time of the bay, which is 13.5 days now, could be much shorter, not trapping the plankton and that recipe. Some other areas of the bay are reforesting well. The bioluminescent bays are so complicated and interesting, you know, like they connect to salt flats, to another bay. They're built by corals and seagrass and mostly mangroves, but so many things matter that we thought it was a good effort.
Thank you. From Lynette, is there any coalition of countries particularly susceptible to climate change and sea level rise that can serve as more powerful voice than individual countries at COP26 and similar venues?
And that's a much better question for my executive director than for me, because she worked in GLISPA, which is a more global island group, and also with the climate strong climate change initiative, island initiative. These are people who are putting together exactly how you're thinking. And I think we gotta stand behind them, because although many islands have different ways of seeing the changes, and obviously it's not linear, not every place suffers from climate change, sea level rise at the same time, but islands are very, very vulnerable for this. So I think we have to make a stand. I have seen it in her work, how islands are standing together. Part is the US islands, like the Island Strong Climate Change Initiative, that is trying to get people together. And then the GLISPA is very recognized and international. And so yes, there's those two, and I'm sure there's more. I will say this, when you mentioned when we get to a COP and the Glasgow, et cetera, there's a need for real policy change. A lot of it is just talking, a lot of it is excuses, a lot of it is that. So these groups definitely can put pressure, can be louder. We have to back them up.
Thank you so much. We have, as this is the tail end of the presentation, I would like to invite our audience to interact directly with you using their voices and sharing their videos. So if you would like to ask your questions directly to Mark, this is your opportunity. And I see a question in the chat from iPad number 2. Would you like to ask your question live?
iPad 2.
Sure. This is Alan Johnston. How are you?
Good. How are you, Alan?
I'm good. I was wondering about the impact of COVID. I wonder, as the population, you mentioned it varies from 8,000 to 10,000 of the island. Has it? Are there fewer people coming, or how has COVID affected the
immensely? Yeah, it definitely did. When COVID hit, there was a proactive approach from some of the groups, especially community groups, that were working in Vieques. Puerto Rico also actually shut down quite early during COVID, which paid off. Then at one point it opened and we saw some spikes happening, so we closed again. And I'm talking Vieques now and Puerto Rico. COVID, massive impact in the people that came for at least 1 year. And now it's starting to come back. And again, it's you balance it out. Puerto Rico and Vieques have a very solid vaccination rate, and it has a very Vieques. I was part of it at one time and not anymore, so I can say this without trying to be humble. Vieques has the best contact tracing team I ever seen, and obviously that's a new thing, but they created a fantastic vaccination system, a great contact tracing team. So many times they were at zero. Obviously, they're an island and there were some controls. They have people coming from a lot of places and they were able to control all their big spikes. So that was fantastic. So that invited people to think, wait, there's no COVID there, let's go. So now we're getting a lot of tourists and we'll see how that happens versus the vaccination rate that's going on in the States. It was definitely an economic impact here and emotional as well. I mean, you have all these things happening in a row, Maria into COVID, and then another hurricane season coming. The possibility of having a hurricane in COVID was very scary. But Vieques, again, outstanding in its contact tracing and in its COVID teams.
Okay, thank you.
I will say this to add to it. It did prevent us from opening the aquarium for a period of time. Therefore, it's still completely working and all that, but protocols that changed in terms of areas did not allow us to do all the programs. So we pivoted again and created a vocational program and took that time to teach youth, teens and about to graduate high school and some that did to how to be guides, ecotourism guides. And there was some birding involved from one of Daphne's students. Eric.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Colleen, I see your comment in the chat. Would you like to make it live?
Hi, good evening. I'm Colleen McNamara. I'm in Vieques. I work with Mark. I am the president of the Vieques Conservation and Historical Trust. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to all of you with the Crowder-Messersmith Conservation Fund and to Daphne for her years of service and education, and to Mark for everything he does for Vieques. Thank you all.
Thank you. These are like the women that are behind all these presentations I do, and they do most of the work, but I look like I do everything. So
Thank you. Kathy, would you like to make your comment live?
I'm trying. I'm having a hard time. Okay, there, let the video to go on. I recall, this goes back 25 years. I recall the bombing, and I recall a lot of concern, the civil disobedience. And my recollection is that there was concern of the effect on whales and large marine life. Is that what your recollection is? And do you know if the whale population has rebounded?
I do not know the answer to the last question. I do remember, and actually I'm a whale researcher on my free time with the WISE Environmental and Toxicology Laboratories, and we biopsy whales, but we don't work in Puerto Rico. So Nilda Jimenez from the Department of Natural Resources would probably be the best person to answer that question. I do validate what you're saying, that there was a big concern with the low frequency sonar. When the Navy was present, a lot of bombing, and there are some cases of Navy ships having hit certain different, including a sperm whale, certain different whales at one point. That didn't happen as often. There was also 16 goosebeak whales, I believe was a species, I would have to check, that were beached once in St. Croix, and there was some concern about that. There was a professor from Harvard that did some work on that. I would have to go back and check. But in terms of whales, we are seeing them, mostly humpbacks, especially February and March. They seem to be good, but I don't have any numbers or data that could answer your question well.
Well, thank you.
All right. Again, thank you all for being here with us. Thank you, Mark, for your valuable time and your immense contribution, you and your team, to the nature of Vieques and the community that lives around you. Daphne and Don Messersmith, would you like to say any last words? Daphne, I see you speaking but muted.
Is that better?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to thank Mark for accepting the invitation to talk to us tonight. I thought it was very informative. I learned a lot, in spite of all my years of going to Vieques. So thank you, Mark, and I will see you soon. And thank you, Don, for your introduction.
Fine.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my visit to Vieques, and it's like a little world in itself, and some very good birds. So we enjoyed it. Yes, I'm glad so much is happening to recover from the hurricane. Very good, Mark.
Thank you for that, and hopefully you can come down and see some bird with us. We'll send you pictures. We have been seeing some interesting birds, and so we're waiting for Daphne to validate them for us and jot them down. So I'm sure she'll send pictures.
All right, wonderful. And to our audience, thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.